Hi, this is Art Kelly again, and I'm doing my second video of the Apprentice series. Last time I introduced the idea that what it is to be a disciple is to be an apprentice of Jesus. Today we're going to talk about finding ourselves in the story of God. As followers of Jesus, we have to understand where we've come from, what's been going on before we ever got here on the planet, what's going to happen in the beginning, and what are we supposed to be doing right now with our lives. And the only way to understand your life is to see your life as a point in time on a storyline. Something that another good author that I have read that introduced the idea of story to me was a guy named John Eldredge, who wrote a book called Wild at Heart. And it's a book for men, and it lays out the core desires of men. And but it all stems from this deeper understanding that we are in a story. He also shares in another book called Epic that life is, for us, it comes to us as a story. And because it comes to us as a story, many of us are confused about the story that we're in, because we're entering into life much like we would enter into a movie or a TV show 30 or 45 minutes into it. Have you ever done that before? Walked into maybe your family's sitting down on the couch and they're watching a movie and you hadn't been able to be there for the first half hour of it. And so you sit down and grab your plate of food and you start watching. You realize, I don't know what's going on. Who's the villain here? Who's the hero? Why did all this stuff happen? And you start asking questions. Well, if you're like my family, you start getting some feedback, and it's usually like, oh, man, do I have to sit here? I got to pause this now, right? So people don't want to pause and stop and explain the whole story to you. You've got to figure out what the backstory is. That's how life is. We come to life in this world. We're born onto this planet, and it's like we're in a movie 45 minutes late. We don't know what's been going on. We don't know who we are. We don't know the part that we're supposed to play in the story. We don't know who the evil villain is. We don't know who the hero is. We don't even know that there is a hero or that there is a villain. We just know that something is wrong. We walk around and we look and we see things, and something isn't right in the world. The story is what we need to figure out. And so what do? We begin to search. And we look for it in places that many times we find a loss of understanding. Sometimes we even look in the church and we miss it. Because oftentimes what happens when we go to church is we get a partial part of the story. This idea that there was this man that came and died on a cross and offers salvation. But there's this whole backstory of human history that many of us don't realize has been going on since before we got here. And if we don't understand that story, then we won't understand why that story about Jesus and the cross really matters. The truth is that there is a time coming where we will stand before the one who made us. And we will have to give an account for our lives in some way, shape, or form. It would be good to know that if He's asking me to give an account for my life at some point, then did He at some point along the way during my story give me an opportunity to understand what His expectations were and how to meet those expectations so that I can be ready for that moment in the future? Well, God did that. He did that, and He gave us the most incredible story ever told, the Bible. But it's not just a story, right? It's many stories. And it's funny because when I read the Bible, when I used to read the Bible when I was a kid, I used to read it and I would find things in this book that I didn't understand. I didn't get. A lot of times I really felt like there was just kind of a lot of morals and do's and don'ts, rules, regulations. As I got older and as I became a little bit more understanding of what is going on in the world and what I'm supposed to be a part of, I've started to understand that the Bible is a book of stories. And the stories, the reason why God wants us to see our lives as a story is because he knows that that's really the only way that we can fully understand who he is and how he's working. When Jesus came on the planet, that's all he did was tell stories. That was his way of communicating. And so God chose stories. He gave us stories about Adam and Eve. He gave us stories about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, stories about Joseph and the children of Israel. He gave us stories about the group of people that he chose for himself, and how many times back and forth they went between following him and not following him. And in those stories, we see ourselves. We see our own lives, because we realize I'm a lot like these people. They're not these extraordinary, superhuman beings. They're just people, just like you and me. They worked regular jobs, and they had families, and they had struggles, and they had problems. They had brokenness. And then later on in the story, Jesus comes in and takes all the stories and puts them all together, and helps us to all understand that he is what all of those stories were pointing to. That his story is the story of God. That's history. My story is the story of me, and it's a mystery. But the exciting thing about knowing the story that he's telling is by understanding the historical record and the things that God reveals to us about himself in the Bible, by understanding how that big picture story is mattering all around this world, it will help me to understand how my little story fits up into the bigger story. That my story matters to God, that Jesus came for me, and he came because he loves me, but he also came for us, and he draws us up into the story that he's telling, and he invites all of us to become a part of the kingdom that he is advancing in the hearts and the minds of men and women all over this planet. To be an apprentice of Jesus, to be a disciple of Jesus, is to learn how to find myself in that big story that he's telling. And so, as we continue to move on in our series, I want to encourage you to stop reading the Bible as a series of lists of do's and don'ts. Sure, there's things that morals and teachings that Jesus gives us and many of the other authors of the Bible give us. But the greatest gift the Bible gives you and I is that it gives us a story to belong to. It gives us a family when we don't have one. And it gives us a greater, larger vision for our lives than we would ever have on our own. Thanks for joining me today.